some new studies that show that high fructose corn syrup actually depletes the zinc from the body. And zinc is a very, very important mineral. We need it for our immune system, for wound healing, for hormonal health, and it's also very, very important for mental health. People who have a lot of anxiety tend to be very low, very depleted in zinc. So if we're consuming something that's depleting zinc from our body, we're not helping ourselves.
Wow. Okay.
And what are people going to
so fast?
What are people going to find fructose in that they should stay away from?
Unfortunately, it's in a lot of things. The biggest offender tends to be what I call liquid candy. So that would be soda or other beverages that are very sweet. But it also can be in a number of things that we wouldn't necessarily think of as sweet, savory products or whatever. It is a very, very cheap sweetener to make. And so when manufacturers are looking to make something a little sweeter, and we can talk about why they do that in a minute, but when they do that, they're looking for the most cost-effective way to do that. And frequently that means high fructose corn syrup.
And aren't there, I'll pick on this in particular. In my thinking, I think something like salad dressings is not someplace where we think of sweetening.
Exactly.
And yet it seems like an easy place to hide that. Is that correct?
It absolutely is. And what I think is very funny is that at one point it was used very heavily in ketchup, which is a savory food, and like you said, a salad dressing. And you would think, why do you need to sweeten that? Now there are a lot of companies that say no high fructose corn syrup in big letters on their label. And unfortunately, a lot of people think, well, if those manufacturers don't have it, the others probably don't either, and they don't flip that bottle over to read the label. And there are a lot of labels, ketchup, salad dressings, other savory foods, sweet foods that have high fructose corn syrup in it, and the only way you're going to know is if you read the label.
I'm sorry, it made me think about things like, I won't mention, the company, but we'll all know who it is. The place where you, sort of the starters of the frappuccino.
Yeah.
Is it so if you go any place and ask for a pump of vanilla or any kind of sweetened goo into a coffee beverage, I'd be willing to bet, I would like to put that in as a disclaimer, that there's high fructose corn syrup in it because it's the cheapest way to make it sweet. Am I misguided?
You're probably not, and like you, I have to say these are my opinions because obviously I don't have every single label out there in my brain, but frequently it is one of the first things that they turn to. And, it sounds, a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today sound very overwhelming, and people sometimes go, oh, man, what do I do now? It's a lot to take in. And I really want to reassure you the best thing that you can do, the simplest way to take back control is to learn one habit, and that's to read the label. The more you read, the more you know, the more changes you can make for your own health. And manufacturers sort of count on the fact that you don't do that to try to get away with adding things to your food.
Like
so now I guess we can, go ahead, Sherry.
I was going to say, like GMOs, they're fighting to keep that off the label.
They are, and one of the challenging things for many people is to understand the vast array of genetically modified foods that are currently in our food chain. Corn, soy, and canola are the three most genetically modified crops on the face of the planet. So not only are we getting high fructose corn syrup, which is not good for us because of the nature of the product, it's genetically modified corn. And so that adds insult to injury, if you will. We have, even regular corn syrup is probably genetically modified. If it doesn't say organic corn on the label, there's a very strong possibility that it's genetically modified. And when we start to look into the effects of genetically modified foods on the environment, on our bodies, on our systems, it really is pretty horrifying.
We want to back up to your book with this question in mind. Is it the genetically modified food that's the problem? Is it the food marketing to people who are not discriminating? Is it the food processing it? Is it our choices? Is this what your book addresses? And we're looking at it on our WebEx here, the Pantry Principle from Amazon. 5 stars, guys. Richard, do you want...
The answer is all of the above.
Okay.
The information in the book is there to help people learn about what's really in our food so that they can begin to make healthier choices. It is a step-by-step process. I promise you, nobody is going to read that book and then the very next day implement all of those changes and be done with it. It is a process of change, in part because manufacturers work very hard to try to convince us not to read the label. Then when we're reading the label, there's only so much we can take in at one time. We have to figure out where to start. In addition to that, there are a lot of things that happen to our food that have come into being for the convenience of the manufacturer, but they're so brilliant with their marketing that they've convinced us that they're making it convenient for us. The truth of the matter is most people think that food manufacturers are in the business of making food, and I truly believe they're not. They're in the business of making money, and the way they do that is however they can. So here's a great example that I absolutely love. Starbucks at one point they have a drink called strawberry frappuccino, and they were using a vegetable-based colorant. And they decided to switch to cochineal, which is made from bugs. And they didn't tell anybody, they just made the switch. But luckily for everybody who is, interested in their food, this is a very information-connected age, and as soon as somebody finds out, they generally blab. So the word got out, and quite frankly, vegetarians were disgusted because they choose not to eat bugs, and people who may, for other reasons, have chosen not to eat bugs as well, were very upset about it. And a huge hue and cry came up, and in very short order, Starbucks went back to a vegetable-based coloring.
I love social media for that reason. I think that's why it's so powerful for us to, as you say, in this day and age, what a wonderful thing that we can actually have influence by getting on Twitter or, pick the social media of your choice and hammer this something until they have to go, oh, wait a minute, people aren't happy. They won't be drinking our bug coffee.
Exactly. And, when we look at, and part of the challenge, one of the things that I'd like to talk with you today is how manufacturers and food producers manipulate the spin that they put on things.
I'd love to hear that.
On the topic of color, Kraft recently had a huge public media relations list about how they were removing artificial color from so many of their packaged pasta products, most of which are aimed at children. Now, we're not even going to go into the fact that that's not a great food choice. We're just going to look at the fact that they removed the color from most of them, but not from all of them. And so people make the assumption when they hear this that the ones that they're buying are safe, and they may not choose to look at the label. And then they remember that Kraft said this, but it's not across the board. This is where we need people to be vigilant and to be mindful of what they're doing.
What should people look for, and what should they try to eliminate first?
That really is a matter of personal preference. And some of it depends on what's going on with your health. If you're someone who is struggling with diabetes or other health conditions that may be related to your sugar intake, you want to start looking at the types of sugars that you're eating and where sugar appears in your food. If you are perhaps a parent of a child with ADD, ADHD, you probably want to start by removing artificial colors from the diet. If you're, one of the things that I talk about in the book is all of the negative health effects, for example, of MSG, and how many different places it hides in because it has so many different names. And many people, when they stop taking it, discover that a lot of low-level issues that they hadn't really paid attention to have gone away. People who have digestive issues, we need to look at things like carrageenan, which is a red seaweed. I mean, it's a very broad topic, and that's actually why I wrote the book. There was so much information that it needed to all be brought together in one place.
I guess I didn't want to jump to this because I have a lot of other questions, but what you've just talked about leads me to ask you about your 7 simple rules that you talk about in your book. I think that's a good place for people to start because we're talking so much about labels. Talk to us about your 7 simple rules.
Absolutely.
Please.
And you know, I suppose we could back it up even further and say, so the very first thing that people need to do is learn to read the label, make it a habit. But the next thing you could do, yes, is to implement the 7 simple rules. And these are ways to help you begin to learn to think about what is in your food and why you don't want to eat certain things. You know, one of the rules, for example, is if it has a number, don't eat it, because real food does not grow by numbers. There is no banana 27. It doesn't exist. And if it comes with a number after it, that means it was created in a lab. So not only artificial colors, but some of the preservatives like polysorbate 80, which is a very common one. Another rule, of course, is if you can't pronounce it, you probably don't want to eat it. This is one that sometimes requires a little bit of thought, only because when quinoa first came out, for example, a lot of people didn't know how to pronounce it. You know, quinoa, quinoa. So people had to learn. But it is a real food, and as we learn that, we then know we can eat it. But when it comes to sulfate potassium, some people are like, what? So we learn how to pay attention in that way. Other rules would include if it has more than 4 syllables. And it's very funny, actually, with that one. Several of my nutrition colleagues and I sometimes play a game to see how many real foods we can come up with that have more than 4 syllables, because they are out there, but they're recognizable in real foods. And it just requires you to think about what you're doing. So those 7 rules are a great way to pay attention to starting your journey to real food.
I think it's a great foundation to start. You know, even if you, from my view, even if you pick up a bottle and just start looking at the label, I think that's a great place to start. And partially because if you see something and then take it home and you notice you feel a little odd later, at least that's sort of in your brain that, oh, I did get that thing that had that weird word. Maybe I want to look that up and see if that can have any effect on how I'm feeling. If you're having food allergies or, you know, some other kind of reaction to something, it's a good place to start to, you know, rarely do we have issues when we eat an apple.
Exactly.
You know, especially if it's organic. That's another thing. You talk about it.
You know, I also, I was just going to say, I also tell people, if you're beginning to read the label and you are really working to get rid of things in your pantry that don't belong there, and one day you're in a hurry and you bring something home and look at it before you put it in the pantry. Make it a 2-stage process. And if you buy something and realize that it's got something in there that you don't want, take it back trust me, they will take it back at the grocery store. They may say, why are you bringing it back? And you say, I just realized there's an ingredient in here that I can't eat. They're not going to say to you, oh, sorry, we can't help you. So I do encourage people to bring it back if they do inadvertently bring something home.
That's a great idea. Can you talk a little bit more about, I wasn't going to go someplace else, but I had bolded this and you talked about it, artificial colors. Can you talk about the petrochemical relationship to artificial colors? Because I want people to be really creeped out by this.
Yeah, that is huge. Artificial colors are made from petrochemicals, and they are there simply because using them allows manufacturers to get very consistent looking color in the food. There's a particular formula for each color, and the big challenge with it is that predominantly in people with attentional disorders, it has a huge impact. There was a very big study that came out in 2007. It was done by the University of Southampton and published in the journal Lancet. And it showed that for children with ADD, ADHD, consuming artificial colors, and benzoate, by the way, promoted inattentive behaviors and other problems related to attention deficit disorders. It also found, startlingly enough, that there were children who were not formally diagnosed who had a problem with these artificial colors. Part of the reason that manufacturers use them is because they are brighter, bolder, more consistent colors, but they also do it because biologically we are programmed to seek out colorful food. That's what nature uses to signal us that it's right. But there's no fruit loop tree out there. So that color basis needs to be something that we think about instead of purchasing on autopilot.
Yeah. You painted the picture. You gave me the animated picture of the Fruit Loop tree. It's so true. You know, if we only felt the same way when we walked to the produce department and looked at the amazing color of apples and, or, ripe banana or, just pick a fruit, peaches, pears, cut melon. It is really amazing how, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love this time of year because the farmers markets, you walk in and there's just this array of wonderfully colored foods, summer squashes and that brilliant red of a fabulous, fragrant, delicious tomato. There's nothing like it. And you can't manipulate that you can try, but there's definitely a difference between the artificial colors.
It is really quite amazing. It is actually funny in a dark humor way when I go to the farmer's market and I look at, particularly this time of year in California, it's been hot enough that the tomatoes are really just, the tomato guy, I know one of the tomato guys, and it's just like, please take my tomatoes. I have too many tomatoes. God, please help me. I'll give you a great deal. But I mean, the tomatoes are like big and amazing, and the colors are just so, they're over the place with heirloom colors. Yellow tomatoes, black tomatoes, green tomatoes, amazing tomatoes. And then you go to the grocery store because you need paper towels or something, and you look at the tomatoes, and they're little squarish, kind of scared-looking tomatoes. They don't have the vibrancy. They don't have the vital force to them because they've been forced to, ripen in ethylene gas or not at all. Or, it's a completely different world. Go look at I love knowing the people that grow my food. It's an amazing thing to be able to have that relationship because they're, it adds a vitality to the food as well. It's such a different experience.
And the flavors are unbeatable. I mean, my husband and I just picked a tomato from our garden yesterday, and we enjoyed it. And there is the texture and the flavor are indescribable, and yet a grocery store tomato is going to be consistent every time. It's going to be about that same firmness and that same sort of cardboardy consistency, and there's not going to be much fragrance or flavor to it. But it looks like a tomato, and that's what they're selling.
it looks like to me, I always kind of think of it in my mind, is it looks like it's acting as if it's a tomato. I don't really think it's a tomato because it's such a different food, because a real tomato, lots of times at the market, the trick with the tomatoes is that they're so like ripe and bursting at the moment that they're really delicate to handle. I mean, you can't just toss them in a grocery bag like you can a wad of tomatoes from the grocery store that'll bump around with the apples and the potatoes and not be harmed. And a real juicy out of the garden tomato will literally crush and leak, and it's tricky, but it's filled with vitality.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Steve from chat brings up something I want to bring in here. He says, if the label is too small or poor contrast to read, I don't buy it. Seems like a common tactic to hide the less than optimal ingredients. Well,
I agree.
Incredible manipulation.
Yeah, they're required to put information on the label, but they're not required to make it legible. I have been complaining for a while, and I'm not sure if it's the fact that I'm getting older and my eyesight's getting worse, but it seems more and more that I need to bring a magnifying glass. The latest tactic, as he mentioned, is that they're using, for example, gray print on a red background, and it's virtually impossible to read. For things like that, one of the ways I deal with it, I don't buy it, but I'll sometimes write down the product and then come home and try and look it up on the internet just because I'm curious to see what exactly are they trying to hide. And I assure you, it's never anything good.
Another question from our audience, actually this one came in before the show when someone found out you were going to be here. They said they went to a health deli and paid $12 for a shake that was so bitter and obnoxious they couldn't hardly choke it down. But then they went to McDonald's and got a blueberry pomegranate shake for $3. And it was yummy and good, and they slurped it right down. What's the difference if they're both supposed to be, the deli's supposed to be much more healthy, but they couldn't eat it, and $12. So 4 times as expensive, but he slurped down the McDonald's with joy.
Well, I'm going to venture a guess, and I don't know because obviously I don't have the ingredient label right in front of me, but with the shake that came from McDonald's, there are probably flavor-enhancing chemicals in there, or there is sugar in there, and it's blended to a consistency and a taste pattern that hits what they call the bliss point. It's just the right amount of mouthfeel and sugar and potential either real fat or fake fat to make it enjoyable. The shake that they may have gotten at the other location, I'm guessing, was probably made from whole food ingredients, but because they're not used to it, the consistency and the texture was something that they weren't used to, and it didn't have any added sugar. So it's going to, the more we eat higher sugar foods, the more our palate changes. And we have what is essentially a higher and higher set point. So as we begin to shift to lower sugar foods, it takes a little bit of adjustment because we need to learn how to accommodate for the fact that we're not getting as much sugar. Let's face it, if you start putting sugar in crackers and ketchup and applesauce, which I've never understood because apples are so sweet, it takes more sugar when you eat the sweet things for your body to think, or for your mouth to think it tastes sweet.
This is an example. When they're talking about the ingredients in this blueberry pomegranate, I'm looking online here. It's got all of this pineapple, raspberry, puree, natural plant, blah, da, 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 and it's mixed with yogurt. Now, way down here, it says in the yogurt is whey protein concentrate, fructose, cornstarch, modified food starch, gelatin, contains active yogurt cultures. So even online, they're attempting to put what they would feel the good stuff of, clarified demineralized pineapple juice concentrate. All that's up front, and the other is kind of down here in the corner. It takes a lot to...
Food starch, for example, is going to give it the consistency that they're thinking they need. They're adding corn syrup, which is extra sweetness. So they're manipulating it. It's not as natural as they want you to believe it is.
You really have to dig to find this stuff.
You do. It's very challenging sometimes. And there are also times when you'll go to a food producer's website to look for what's in their food, and you can find the nutrition label pretty easily, but it's hard to find the ingredient panel. It's there, but it's just buried or difficult to get to.
And did I hear you mention earlier that, I think this is the truth, that manufacturers are trying to set our set point higher for sweet? What is the agenda there? What is the tactic? Why do they want us to want things so sweet? What does that do?
I personally believe it's twofold. One is that because we are biologically programmed to seek out sugar, it used to be very, very hard to come by. Now we live in an age of plenty where we're surrounded by it. But it was back then, it meant, quick energy, et cetera, et cetera. So if they can convince us that their food tastes better by adding sugar, we will develop a preference for it. The other is, I have seen so many times with people that the more sugar you consume, the more you want. It's very addictive in some ways, and so that then inclines you to want to eat more. And what manufacturers are looking to do essentially is build brand loyalty. They want you to consume their products. They want you to think that theirs tastes the best, and sugar is one of the ways to win. Unfortunately, they also have new things that they're doing. There's a company called Genomic that is starting to work very heavily with flavor modifying chemicals, so they can manipulate the flavor profile of foods by the addition of certain chemicals. It's really horrifying.
Well, it's so scary because I was trying to remember the gentleman who talked about, used that great phrase, that's such a spooky phrase when you think about it, the bliss point.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a guy whose book I read who's like the guy who invented the concept of the bliss point. Which is just, like people in lab coats sitting around in a room designing foods. I'm trying to come down off my soapbox, but I'll be back in a minute. Come down, sitting in a room with lab coats and pocket calculators in the old days. I'm dating myself. Trying to figure out how our food is supposed to taste so that we want to buy and eat more of it. So that when we open that bag of chips, we find our hand at the bottom of the bag and don't know how we got there. It's amazing. Versus, like what you were talking about, going out to the garden and picking that tomato or eating an apple. And I'm not saying that, crunchy, junk foody stuff can't be fun, but it's just that there's a whole science now behind what they make our food taste like, so we need and want more of it.
Absolutely.
I don't have a question there. I'm just horrified.
I know, and that's where helping people to understand what's really in their food is huge, because the more you know, the more empowered you are to be able to change what's going on and how you are able to really take back control. As you said at the top of the program, I'm a certified nutrition educator, but I also call myself a real food advocate. We have gotten away from eating real food because manufacturers have manipulated it and really tried to convince us that they'll handle it for us. And the more we can go back to eating real food, the better off we'll be.
And I'm gonna jump slightly. This is in a category of real food, but this is another spooky category. And there's nothing about labeling about this at all, or very rarely labeled about radiating food. What are your thoughts about radiating food?
Well, irradiating food is done as a means of promoting long-term shelf stability. And there are some concerns about how it could potentially modify some of the nutritional content of food. I've not yet seen any specific studies comparing it. You know, anytime you process food, there's a nutrient loss. I mean, there's some foods that when you cook them, it actually opens up things, but that's sort of a whole biochemical discussion that I don't think we're ready to go into at this point. But when you boil something versus steaming it versus frying it versus heat processing it in the lab versus irradiating it, there's different nutrient losses at every step of the way. And so the object is to figure out where is it acceptable. And as I said, I haven't seen any specific studies that have looked at the nutrient or profile changes for irradiation. I just know that it's done for shelf stability so that it can last for a long time in a grocery store without refrigeration.
Which creeps me out. That's my opinion. You know, the idea of food rotting is because it's old. I mean, it's a real thing. Things rot because they're past their shelf life, their own natural shelf life. I don't think an apple should be able to sit on a shelf for 5 years. Or I know they do this with herbs. I've seen for years that they've been radiating herbs, because people don't really think about that. You know, herbs are sort of a benign, you know, we talk about them, but, you know, particularly in a culinary way. People don't think about, you know, radiating herbs as a way of extending their shelf life. And it's just like, as you talk about that, it just makes my skin crawl at the idea of, oh, yeah, here's I don't know, an ear of corn that can sit on the shelf for a couple of years. A carton of milk. Oh, my God.
They do it with milk.
Oh. Cows hiding in the forest because of that. They're just like horrified at the idea. What an inorganic thing to do, you know, make a carton of milk last for 5 years on the shelf. Oh, my God. Okay, then I have to ask about microwaves. What do you think about microwaves?
I'm generally not a huge fan of microwave ovens, and I will say that I'm not as virulent against them as I used to be. I mean, I used to think, oh, you should never have one. And as a matter of fact, when we didn't have one, I was much happier. But I know that for some people, they don't mind reheating something in it or potentially using it. Like, I love mine for microwaving my sponges because it does a great job of sterilizing anything that's in there. So I think if it's doing that to the sponge, what would it be doing for the food? So my answer to most people is, if you're going to have one and you're going to use it, do not cook in it, and please, by no means, make snacks like microwavable popcorn, because that's just so bad for you on so many different levels.
You're really hitting all of the, like, makes my skin crawl kind of ideas. Although I love the idea, it almost makes me want to dig my microwave that's buried in the garage from years ago out just to sterilize sponges. I think that is a great idea, but that's like the number one use that I can imagine for a microwave. I don't trust them. I'm not sure. I'm a big believer in a phrase that was founded by Carolyn Rappensberger called the precautionary principle.
Sure.
It's not very complicated. You know, like, think about it before you do it. Don't just start jumping in and microwaving everything. And I see a trend where, you know, kids come home from school, and there's a whole line of foods that are invented for this very purpose. Come home from school, grab a snack out of the freeze, throw it in the microwave, the nasty sound bings 30 seconds later, and they've got their snack. I mean, it's just a crazy combination of, you know, events cascading into, like, oh, my God. You know, not that. And
it's also, unfortunately, foods that are developed specifically for the microwave oven tend to be the least healthy things out there. They're high in fat and sugar and chemicals, and just not a great choice at all.
Okay, I see. We could. This could be like, you know, ping pong. We could do this for a long time. I can tell because there's so many categories. But I see us moving toward the end of the hour. I have to ask, what do you want people to get out of your book? I know what I want people to get, but what is your thought of what you'd like people to get out of your book?
I would like people to feel in control of their food and their health. I mean, that's the answer in a nutshell. The more you are willing to read that label and to make different choices, the more you are focusing on your body, your family's needs, and in also getting food producers to make changes and choices to bring us back towards real food.
A radical concept. You're a radical. Oh my God. How radical. I love that. And do you hold classes or workshops or webinars or online anything?
Absolutely, I do. And as a matter of fact, if people will go to my website, grainsandmore.com, or they can also go to thepantryprinciples.net. They can sign up for my newsletter. And every week I give you food news you can use, and I'll also tell you where I am. If I'm speaking or teaching or presenting a program, they can find out about all of that. And when they sign up for the newsletter, they also get a free ebook. It's called Eating Out, Eating Healthy. And it's a great beginning step for people who want to learn how to make those initial changes to have healthier choices when they do choose to go out to eat.
How wonderful. I have
it's
two
not as
more
radical
questions.
as the book, but it's good information.
But it's a great way to start.
Exactly.
Do you do any one-on-one counseling still?
I do. I do work individually with people, and I give away a free 15-minute consult. If they want to go to my website, there's a contact page there. They can reach out to me, and we can set something up.
Wonderful. And I have a last-minute sort of urgent question from the audience. Is there any safe cereal?
The best options are to make it yourself. I mean, honestly, that's the simplest answer in a nutshell. Most of the processed cereals are exactly that. They're highly processed. And even the quote-unquote healthier cereals are going to be so high in sugar as to be not a great choice. Sugar is a huge issue, and we really need to learn to consume less of it.
Is there anything...
I want to end up on an up note. Go ahead, Jeff.
This from the audience, too. Is there anything short of just not buying the products? Can we help demand different advertising that go to our children? What can we do as consumers? Read the label for yourself, but what can we do as a whole for the whole movement?
Absolutely. That is a great question. And in my newsletter, I am frequently telling people about issues that are on the table either because they are coming up in front of the USDA or the FDA, or because there's something that is about to undergo legislation on a state or federal level. And I let them know where they can write to and who they should write to allow people to know what their feelings are and that they want it to be different. So I definitely work very hard to keep people in touch with that. I also do that through my social media feed. You can find me online on Twitter at Mira Dessy, and I share a lot of that through my Twitter posts as well.
We have lots and lots of other questions. We're going to have you back. Well, I guess we should ask first if you're willing to do that.
I would love to come back. That would be great.
There are some great questions about why our food has less nutrients in it now. Why do they put dye in carrots? And we just don't have time.
I would love to come back. That was great.
I'll throw out a tease because there's a phrase that I've seen you use called sustainable changes. And I'm not going to tell anybody, but we're going to have you back because I thought it was such a wonderful underlying principle that you have of sustainable changes. I just thought it was just great. So we'll definitely have to have you back because there's just so many things that we can talk about. Obviously, you know, I had notes instead of an idea of where we were going, but it just jumped all over because of, you know, look at this for God's sake.
I know, it's such a broad topic when you start to look at what's in your food. And the most wonderful thing is every small change that someone makes is one thing more than they were doing before, and it all contributes to better health. And really, you are your own most powerful advocate, and the best thing you can do, again, is to start with that label. Just learn to read that label, and the changes will be amazing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mira. This has been great, and we'll definitely be talking about you coming back because there's a lot more that, you know, I can get on a soapbox about just because I can't help myself, and because you have, you know, I love that as a principle, that it's a step-by-step process, and just what you said is so powerful. It's right along the lines of, you know, this thing that Sherry talks about with, you know, she really wants people to be empowered to take and, you know, really get a grip on their own health, and you're in that same category of one step at a time. Every step is an improvement. Let's all, you know, take the power back in our own health. It's amazing. I love that.
Well, thank you both so much for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. This has been great.
Thanks so much. Any closing thoughts, Sherry?
No, I just think opening people's minds to all of this and some of the things that we've had on before about GMO foods and a new movie out, Cereal, as in cornflakes, Cereal Killers. I just put the link in. So bringing attention to how we're being manipulated through food, and goes right back to last week's show about the corporation as psychopathic, only interested in themselves, not how what they do affects us.
But your casual clothes, I love that. Thank you. It's so true. It drives me crazy. Thank you again, Mira. It has been great. Thank you, Sherry. Thanks to chat. Always so excited to see you guys get into the rabble-rousing mode as well. And we'll see you all again next week. And we'll see you in Tuesday's show, which I can't remember either what it is right now. So everybody have a great weekend. Thanks very much.
Later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.